Welcome everyone to this very first Notes from the Field, an initiative from the University of Cambridge Masters in Conservation Leadership Alumni Network, SAPI, UCLAN as it's also known as. I'd first of all a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session, so if you would not like to be on the recording, do just turn your cameras off if you would like to, and if you want to put messages in the chat, and would rather not speak when you're asking any questions, then please do that as well, and we'll be looking out for the chat. I'd first of all like to start by saying we're going to be having a 20-minute talk, and then we're going to be having discussion points. So that's the kind of outline of it. This was sort of conceived by the Alumni Network and driven in particular by Albina and by Soros, Poya Farabi and Albina Mamedova. So fantastic work, well done everybody. And supported and facilitated by Shelley Balderson, all of whom are with us today, all fantastic members of the MPhil in Conservation Leadership, staffing and alumni. I'm Pamela Abbott and I'm chairing this session. And I'm one of the many professional conservationists who are involved with the Masters in Conservation Leadership. And my particular relevance to today is that I co-founded around 10 years ago the Women in Conservation Leadership Network, which is it's currently just an online network. It was more of an in-person one when we started, based around Cambridge. Do join it if you would like to. It is just on Facebook. Do contribute to it. We want to see more women in conservation leadership, both supported by men and women. So there's a task for you to begin with. So this talk today is around, it's Notes from the Field, and it's UN Women at the Intersection of Gender Equality and the Environment, Lessons in Leading and Convening. And it is being delivered by Rosalind Helfand, who was a member of the fantastic 2018 to 19 cohort of conservation leaders, and who has also been instrumental in the fabulous project, the Global Green Recovery Collective. Have I forgotten anything, Shelley, in the beginning of this?
Nope, that sounds fantastic.
Fantastic, wonderful. Over to you, Rosalind.
Thank you so much, Pamela. And hi, everyone. It's really good to do this first talk with you on Notes from the Field. So I am from the 2018 to 19 Conservation Leadership Cohort. And I'm really excited to talk today about the work that I have been doing specifically with UN Women as a consultant. And I'll share more about that in a second. But just to give an overview of the direction I'm going to take with this quick 20-minute talk, is I'm going to give background on the connection between the issues between gender equality and environment. I'll talk a little bit about what UN Women is doing, about the action coalition that I'm leading with UN Women, and some of the lessons and reflections that I have from that work. And then I'm really excited to take that into a short conversation with you and hear your thoughts and questions. So I'm going to start presenting. Take it over to slideshow. Okay. So really quickly, just a little bit about me. I have my own consultancy called PAGE Consulting, which stands for Policy, Advocacy, Justice, Environment. I am the UN Women. So UN Women is the entity of the United Nations for gender equality and women's empowerment. And I am the thematic lead of their Feminist Action for Climate Justice Action Coalition that they convene globally. I'm a co-founder of a UCLAN-led initiative called the Global Green Recovery Collaborative. And I also co-lead on UCLAN's engagement with the Convention on Biological Diversity. And more locally to California, where I live, I co-founded something called the California Global Biodiversity Working Group. And that is a working group that works on connecting local and global policy efforts, especially around engagement in the Convention on Biological Diversity, but also looking at how to make the 23 targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework localized subnationally across California. I'm on the City of LA's Biodiversity Expert Council, and I'm on the Climate Action Advisory Board for one of our state assembly members, Rick Zuber. So I thought it would be helpful for signposting this to signpost it in terms of lessons. And so the first lesson is gender equality is not a plus. That's really important because it is actually frequently, even by folks who mean very, very well in policy making, it is approached as a plus. And it needs to be a necessity. It intersects across environmental and social issues, and it needs to be embraced and prioritized. And the example that I want to use to kind of help illustrate that lesson is the Feminist Climate Justice Framework for Action. This is a framework that UN Women produced as part of its Progress of the World's Women report, which is a several-year cycle that is specifically, they take on different issues with each cycle for the Progress of the World's Women. And for this cycle, they're focused on climate change and gender equality. And they decided to frame that discussion as feminist climate justice. And you can see there's a definition on here as feminist climate justice aims for a world where women, girls, and gender diverse people can flourish on a healthy and sustainable planet. Even though what I'm about to talk about seems to be very focused on climate, throughout this report and the publications and the activities that UN Women is engaged in, they are actually linking climate, biodiversity, and land degradation. And I wanted to really, really highlight that because it's very important to understand that climate is used as a focus point, but it's not just about climate by any means. And this group of women that you see here in the lower right, these are all youth leaders in the Action Coalition that I lead from different countries. And what was really great is that this report is being developed with consultations with our stakeholder partners. And it's an ongoing set of consultations. It's inclusive instead of just extractive. And they all got stipends for their time for consulting on it in focus groups to discuss it. And these are the kinds of things that are important when we start talking about collective action and sustainability of collective action. Is how do we ensure that really strong representational engagement, and how do we respect people's time? So I'm going to just give a couple of illustrations of how these issues connect, how climate, how environment and gender equality issues connect. So these are all from this framework. So the first point one point that I'm highlighting is on how gender-based violence increases in times of crisis, and the climate crisis is no different. So they're giving an example here of how drought is, you can connect it directly to increase in child marriage, for example, and in intimate partner violence. We also know that climate change, by exacerbating water scarcity and increasing water collection burdens for women and girls, can not only increase hours spent on unpaid care and domestic work, which is a really big problem for gender equality, but also increase incidences of gender-based violence. We also know that that small-scale farmers, the majority of whom are women, produce about a third of the world's food, and yet women tend to have very insecure land rights. They are not able to make decisions about the land that they are working. And this is a problem for being able to not only have more climate resilient agriculture, but really change over to much more sustainable agricultural systems that protect biodiversity better. And so land rights is actually a big focus topic when we are talking about gender equality and environment. And a lot of the members of the Action Coalition that I lead for UN Women are actually engaged at that intersection. They're working specifically on land rights, which is a key area for both gender equality and environmental resilience. And I think it's really interesting. This is the framework that's being used to talk about each issue and dissect each issue where we see that intersection between gender equality and environment is around redistribution, recognition, representation, and reparation, or the 4 Rs, as the UN Women team is calling it. So in this example of application of these 4 Rs, we're looking at redistribution of land and finance. We're looking at economic resources, recognizing the right to food and decent work for women, representation of women in decision-making, and reparation by assuming responsibility for historical causes of the breakdown of the global food system. And so this is a really powerful model. And this is the kind, I wanted to illustrate the kind of work coming out of UN Women right now around making these connections. So over to lesson 2, which is on avoiding isolating gender equality. So this actually, all these lessons are linked. You can see there's some overlap, but it's important to integrate in mainstream gender and environment across work streams, and not to just make it an isolated topic that you throw into one paragraph of a report and say, great, you've covered gender. You need to look at how it cuts across the different topics that you're discussing. And so this is actually, I screenshot with my phone of my computer because I couldn't figure out how to get this. It was a hover menu. But UN Women's focus areas include areas ending violence against women, peace and security, so dealing with conflict, humanitarian action, governance, economic empowerment, innovation and technology, women with disabilities, youth, HIV. And one thing that I really wanted to highlight is this is what UN Women is doing right now. And this is one reason why, for me, it's very excited to be a part of this work, is because the UN Women is actually looking at integrating climate and considerations of environmental health, including biodiversity and land degradation across all of these work areas. So this is really critical. And to me, this is the way we get change. When we start to embrace the importance of linking our social issues and our environmental issues, and then linking that further across all the areas that we work in, I think that's where we will start to see the greatest potential for real turnover in our structures and our systems, instead of really dealing with an incremental type of change that can't keep up with the pace of the crisis that we're experiencing. And then further on that, UN Women has published a couple of reports recently that I wanted to highlight. These were in conjunction with the climate COP28 last year. One is on a gender responsive just transition for people and planet. And gender responsive is a really important term. So when you're doing global negotiations and working on texts, there's kind of a rating scale of gender terms. And you can have like the term gender sensitive, which is actually one below. It's less ambitious than gender responsive. And then you go above gender responsive and you have gender transformative, which means you have real, true gender equality. So right now, the term that has become most pervasive is the one that is not unambitious, but also not so ambitious that it might be hard for some people to really say, I don't know if we can change that quickly, is gender responsive. And so you'll see that terminology a lot. But know that term gender responsive is very, very deeply debated and negotiated, and sometimes is a negotiating term that can be used as a tool to either raise the ambition of a text overall for environment or lower it overall, in terms of how ambitious is our gender language or not ambitious. So I'm not going to read that whole definition, but I'll be happy to share the slides after. And then the other one is on the climate care nexus and the care economy. So the economy of women doing household work, for example, or caring for elders, is a really critical foundational role and economy. And we know that also that the care economy and decision making about environmental sustainability are actually linked. And so it's really great too that there's a link in how we think about environment and gender equality and care as well. So I'm just going to read off this first line, which is care work is any labor that involves caring for others, caring for the planet, and caring for oneself, all of which are premised on the existence of basic conditions and the availability of time, as well as goods, resources, and services. So it's really critical work, and yet it's highly undervalued. And you can link that undervaluing of care work in how our current economy functions to the undervaluing of women and girls and the undervaluing of our environmental sustainability. So the next lesson is on convening global multi-stakeholder partnerships. And I just want to make the case that it is worth the work. It is hard work. but we need to do it. And we need to join in recognizing and supporting this work, especially at this nexus of gender and environment. So I'm going to talk about the Action Coalition now that I head up. So first of all, Generation Equality Forum is a project of UN Women. It was in 2021 that 6 action coalitions were founded in a forum in Mexico and then a forum in Paris. And each action coalition has over 100, if not several hundred organizations that have made commitments to complete projects by 2026. It's multi-stakeholder, it's cross-sectoral, it has diverse regional representation. These action coalitions are partnership focused. We have localization programs to really engage at the subnational levels. And you can see it's across all 6 of these subject matters. So my action coalition is just one of these 6, but we work together. And a little bit more now on the Feminist Action for Climate Justice, or as we like to call it, FACJ. So as 4 priority action areas, it's championed by over 163 organizations. The areas are around increasing direct access to finance for gender just climate solutions, especially for grassroots levels, enabling women and girls to lead a just transition to a green economy. And this has a big focus on access to decision-making spaces, increasing collection and use of data on the gender environment nexus. This is a huge, huge, huge growing area worldwide. And we actually started out COP28 with a conference on the gender and environment nexus that was co-led by IUCN and the Women in Environment Development Organization and UN Women, and building the resilience of women and girls to disaster, including through land raids. You can see this is an example. You can see how many different kinds of commitments we have to the, so I'm working with organizations that have about 163 organizations that have 203 commitments across all of these different sectors, including governments. And this is a little bit of our global distribution. And I just want to highlight that even though you see these big bubbles for Europe and North America, most of the organizations that are in Europe and North America, their commitments are focused globally and often in the global south. So even when it says it's for Europe, it's usually for the global south. A few of them are Europe focused though. And this is an example of what a commitment looks like. So this organization is Girls for Climate Action. And their commitment that they made through 2026 is on advancing young women and girls. Climate action is what it's supposed to say. And it's based in Uganda. And they're working on training young women and girls to be climate advocates, but also stewards of the environment, including in rural communities. And it's not just on stewardship, but also on advocacy and policy training. And we have a leadership structure. So I am the thematic lead, but UN Women says we convene, we don't lead the Action Coalition. So some of the organizations that made commitments also are leaders. And I just wanted to highlight that we have youth-led organizations leading equally. So they're equally at the table with UN agencies like UN Environment Program and UNDP and the UNFCCC, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, civil society organizations, philanthropies. We're all very much at the table together. And then I just wanted to briefly link this to the Rio Conventions. So UN Women is very, 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 very engaged with all of the Rio Conventions. And just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight, because also our Action Coalition is engaged with the Rio Conventions, and we work together with UN Women. So UN Women will be at all of the COPs this year. Data will be a key focus area, as well as finance, of course. Biodiversity and health is another important topic for us. A gender action plan or plan of action should be well integrated. So all of the Rio Conventions have some sort of gender plan. But they're not, I personally would say they could be better integrated across the development of policies and plans right now. And so we really want to see that. We know that the CBD target 23 is important. This is the target that's focused on gender equality so CBD, I should have said the GBF target 23, the Global Biodiversity Framework, but it's focused on gender equality, but we need to see it applied across MBSAPs. We need to see it integrated and mainstreamed. Then efforts to link work across the conventions continues to be really important so that we don't kind of isolate our climate work from our biodiversity work, for example. And we need to engage and collaborate with stakeholders, and we need to be unafraid of that. This is one of our youth leaders, by the way, for the Action Coalition at 20. And this is an example of a collaboration with one of our commitment makers to the Action Coalition. So the Nordic Council of Ministers is the commitment maker. And this is an example of what they're doing in the Nordic region. They're linking gender equality across energy, their climate adaptation plans, transitioning to blue and green economies, green jobs, reducing consumption, having better climate policies. And even though it's for their region, they wanted to bring together a global group to discuss this and give input on it. So you can see there's a global group here talking about this during COP28. And then for effective leadership and management of coalitions, as well as collective action, we need research and core support. There's just not enough research being done on collective action, on coalitions. And yet I would say some of the most innovative work in the world right now that's being done is around collective leadership, especially by youth organizations like Fridays for Future. Some of the most innovative work is being done through coalition building, but we don't understand it well enough. And we do know that we need a lot more funding to manage coalitions and collective action. But a lot of funding is still so focused on very simple project outcomes. And I think we need to steer away from that and really, really look at how are we funding long-term transformative change. So my last two slides, just really quickly on reflection, collective action and collective leadership are key. We also need a stronger understanding of ideas like inclusivity and co-creation. I think these terms are really important. They get bandied about a lot, but I think when we have a deep level understanding of them and really implement them in the way that they're meant to be, I think they're important and powerful. We need to engage youth, but we also need to ensure space for older women. So there's a focus these days on getting more youth involved, but sometimes I especially am seeing older women and grassroots leadership spaces not getting the support that they need. And that's also very vital. We can do more and better on global North-South collaboration. And I think we need to really, really look hard at how we facilitate that collaboration. It is possible to break down traditional barriers and hierarchies and bring together your youth, your grassroots and governments for open conversation. So I've heard a lot of people say you just can't do it. Like governments don't want to be on the same panels as a grassroots organizer and blah, blah, blah. I actually don't think it's true. I think it's about how you set expectations right from the start. And you can successfully get everybody together at the table if you set that up the right way. And the 2024 Rio Conventions are an important moment for reestablishing commitment to gender equality while linking the work across the COPs. And finally, 4 more recommendations for you. Embrace coalitions and embrace super coalitions. So I'd love to see coalitions come together. Super coalitions was actually a term I used in my MPhil dissertation. And it's about coalitions coming together with other coalitions. Don't be afraid of it. Sometimes I see a group that's founded one coalition, they're very afraid of connecting and working with another coalition because they're like, oh, your work overlaps with my work, and now people will be confused. Doesn't work that way. Nobody gets to have like the market on coalitions. You have to, I think it's on us to figure out how to work together and to embrace this idea that coalitions are good, ultimately. Commit to intergenerational working methods. Look at what it means to have a feminist workplace. So I would love to see everyone start reorganizing their organizations, their companies, their workplaces to be feminist, to be less hierarchical, to be more cognizant of the time that we need for our lives and our families, and to embrace boundaries, but also to mentor and to support each other while staying very ambitious in the work that we want to do. And work together for funding and educate funders on collective action and coalitions, including core resources. So I'd like to see more collective action around funding, more organizations coming together for collective funding requests, and less competition focused. I think competition is very patriarchal, honestly, and we can do less of that. And I'll stop there for questions.
Fantastic. Wow. So many lessons, a total tour de force. I suspect everyone is just having that little moment to reflect. So a fabulous array of lessons. I tried to write some of them down. I feel I've learned a lot. So thank you so much, Ros. That was outstanding. So if you would like to ask a question, do just put your hand up in the reactions or the in the participants. I should be able to see that. So excellent. So Valeria, would you like to ask your question? Do unmute yourself if you'd like to ask it yourself.
Sorry. Hi, I don't know if you can see me.
Yeah.
We can. Do introduce yourself as well.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Valeria, and I'm a participant. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I worked with gender in FAO previously, and right now I'm still just trying to educate myself more on the personal note. But I was wondering if you could tell us, give us a few examples of how we can implement feminist perspective or feminist approach in workplace, like any specific examples. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think this is so important. I think it's really, really important to investigate and go through processes of really investigating what we all feel should be feminist about our workplaces. So a feminist workplace, first of all, is breaking down hierarchical approaches and patriarchal approaches to how we work. So a very patriarchal system is a rigid system. It's a system that is so structured that you don't have flexibility for different approaches to work and so that you maintain your work life balance. It's also a system that doesn't respect boundaries about time. So a common approach to work, especially in the global north these days, is an overwork approach where everybody gives many more hours than what they're technically supposed to be giving. There's high levels of burnout. There's very rigid management structures and hierarchies, and you have to fit and mold within those. They also tend to be not very transparent. So transparency is often low, and inclusivity in decision making it tends to be low, and there's not a good understanding of ideas of co-creation. That said, obviously you do have to have some structure, right? You do want to make sure that you're achieving what your organization set out to achieve. You do want people in your organization to be passionately committed, especially when you're working on things like the environment, right? So you do want to see all of those things. So I think that it's very important to say that creating a more feminist workplace doesn't mean that we do less. It means that we're smarter about how we work, and we're more flexible in how we work, and we're more inclusive in how we work of the people that are part of that workplace. And so and also we make room for the needs of, again, for families and home life, and that we are cognizant of things like care roles, right? Women are overburdened with care. And we need to recognize those gender inequalities that are still a part of our society, and be able to have open discussions and not hide those issues.
Thank you. Yes, I recognize some of those global north issues. We all just are so focused on wanting the best outcome often for nature and for climate, that we kind of push ourselves in all sorts of ways, and that's not necessarily healthy. So that was a really great example. I'd next like to come to Rajapaksha, who perhaps has a question next.
Thanks, Pamela.
Next.
Just wanted to ask you, Rosalind, you had mentioned in one of your slides about encouraging or facilitating more older women to get involved in work, just like empowering the youth. There are some interesting initiatives happening in Sri Lanka back home as well, but I just want to know what UN Women is actually doing to kind of promote this idea forward.
So yeah, and obviously, and it's not just about empowering them, but also supporting their engagement. So UN Women, my position, so by the way, I should clarify that I'm a consultant for UN Women, but I've been in my role as a full-time consultant for about going on 2.5 years now. So it's kind of a very, very long-term consultancy. But my position is housed under the economic empowerment section of UN Women. And so part of what UN Women does under our economic empowerment section, which does incredible work, by the way, but it really looks at what it means to economically empower women across the spectrum, right? So whether you're in your local community or whether you're working more in global policy, whether you're a youth or whether you're an older woman. And so one thing that UN Women does is it's very committed to looking at and doing great research on, by the way, we do a lot of research. We have a research and data section at UN Women as well, around what are the key issues faced by women and girls across that age spectrum, and then how do we support them in their work. UN Women doesn't necessarily always provide direct support. So for example, in the work that I do, a lot of women and girls asked to come to global policy events like the Rio Convention COPs. So that's an area where we don't have direct funding from UN Women. But what we can do as a convening organization and with our convening power is we can bring together all of the organizations that are able to support and help to share what the resources are and start to link women and girls to resources. We can also convene, UN Women convenes governments as a UN agency. We convene governments for conversations around how to improve policies. So a lot of the work that's done, the commitments that have been made under this action coalition for which I'm thematic lead, those commitments themselves, by some of them by governments, are focused on increasing support for intergenerational engagement.
Excellent, thank you. I certainly think that being, I suppose, in that category of older women at the moment, I have noticed a lot of my sort of colleagues and former colleagues become more sort of economically and in conservation less active because they have a different burden of responsibilities. And I think we often, and certainly when we started the Women in Conservation Leadership, we really looked at sort of young women with children, how do we do that? We didn't really look at older women with carer responsibilities and kind of that unpaid care that isn't really recognised so much by governments in terms of their incentives, whereas more and more it's about young women. And not that I'm saying it shouldn't be, but we should look across the generation. So that's a great question and a great answer. Thank you very much. I can't see any more hands. We're quite a small grouping. So, oh, sorry. So do feel free, and if you just want to, if you don't want your question to be visible by anybody, because I always find asking a question is the scariest thing. So in conferences, me and I won't name her, but another colleague, we used to dare each other to ask a question in a full conference because women tend not to answer, and then some man answers the questions. Sorry to all the men, you're all fine and you're all very welcome. Ask the question, and then the convener says, that's an excellent question, and you're just thinking, that was my question, I was too afraid to ask. If you want to just message me and you feel it's a silly question, I will just ask the question. So please don't worry, we are absolutely open and inclusive to anything that anybody wants to say. And oh, Doris, you came up with a hand and then you disappeared again. Did you want to say something?
Yes, if that's okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I was going to ask a question, basically. In the developing countries, what happens is gender is considered as a cross-sectorial approach in the policy development. And basically that cross-sectorial approach becomes a checklist or just a tick box. Do you think it's a time to move from a cross-cutting issue and develop a gender-specific policies to be able to tackle some of the challenges that the women face and at least developing countries, basically, rather than being a cross-cutting issue?
Well, I think you have to look at what's happening in reality. So the reality is, one thing that I did not properly highlight when it was in my slides, but I didn't properly highlight it. I want to just go back to this really, really quickly. If I can find my slides, which sometimes things get a little bit weird. hold on one sec. I'm just going to pull this up. So I want to just pull up a stat. So this is something that I kind of breezed over during my presentation that I want to share again. So, okay. So in 2022, so this top portion, this is all from our feminist climate justice framework again. The average level of democracy reverted to a point not seen in 1986, but in the past decade, 34 countries have eroded women's rights to open dialogue. We've seen declines in all sorts of freedoms. We know that women's representation continues to be, despite women's representation in parliaments being associated with stronger climate change policies, women not only hold a low level of parliamentary seats, but are only 15% of environment ministers. We know that women are not heading, only 20% of delegations have been headed by women at the UNFCCC. But back to this erosion. So we're seeing something called the pushback against gender equality worldwide. So countries that had previously had some sort of, we're going to work across sectors and have a checklist on integrating gender equality. Many of those countries themselves have actually experienced pushbacks on gender equality and rollbacks on gender equality policies. This is something really, really, really concerning. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I think that whether you have a checklist or whether you have like an individual policy, we don't know if either one is really getting us to where we need to be for gender equality at this point. So I would say, honestly, we need both. We need specific policies around gender equality, but we also need, I think, to have a very deliberate approach to making sure that gender is well integrated across ministries, departments, and government sectors, that we really are looking at how to make sure that it's across everything. For example, finance, you may have like a gender and climate division person who's working in one division in a government. That doesn't mean that your finance department is really committed to it unless they've had that education. But Suraj, did you have another question?
Yeah, just I think I'm the only male here, so I'm just going to keep at it at this conversation because I really, really enjoyed your talk and there's a lot to learn from it as well. So the second question is that since we see this drawback in terms of gender equality, isn't that time for multilateral donors to basically, not to say have gender in your proposals or we're going to fund you if you have number of women participating, but really focusing that we want to see if we, for example, Jeff, if you are applying for a DC fund or Jeff Star Allocation Fund, we want to see at least 2 NGOs or 2 executing partners led by women. And otherwise, we're not going to release this fund for you. I understand that this approach may hinder conservation initiatives and push back conservation. But in reality, if women is not involved in at least developing countries and not leading this process, then the money that goes in to do environmental activities actually doesn't achieve much because you are cutting the 50%. Is there any option to maybe lobby to put more pressure on governments and patriarchal society, I think, male-driven, male chauvinistic driven societies to be pushed back?
Yeah. I think that's also, that's constantly the goal, is to get more acceptance and understand why. This is part of why I spent so much time on background in this talk, is that I think it's so important to understand why it's important to include gender equality. And it's, like I said in one of my lessons, it's not a plus, right? It's a necessity. But it's true that a lot of it can be seen as a burden. So gender equality reporting, gender equality requirements can be seen as a burden, especially for reporting or for program integration. I think that even some governments who are very progressive have seen this as like, oh, we have to add it to, our list of things that we need to cover. And so this is why this kind of education is really critical, is we have to be very clear on why gender equality is not like a nice to have, something that, oh, okay, we have to add this in. It's actually really, really critical to include. I think sometimes it's a problem to have just like, okay, you hit your 5 women mark on your committee. While that does help us to change representation, we need to also look at more substantive changes as well, and how we can push those, and not only just push numbers and representation. But good point, Sarash, thank you. And I think Albina.
It's Albina next, and I just wanted to support that point around it's not just about numbers. Quite often, because I'm relatively senior in conservation, I get asked to be on a panel, and I don't want to be that kind of token person on the panel. It's very easy to do it about numbers, but actually it needs to be about influence as well. So it needs to be people from different backgrounds, and sometimes people like me need to give way to those who have different perspectives, those of us from sort of privileged Cambridge places. So definitely, yes. Albina, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Rosalind. That was amazing, and lots of things to learn from you. And thanks, Pamela, for encouragement, because I don't like asking questions. I'm very bad in formulating them, so I'll try on my way along. So you said about global north and south, and what about the middle? Because I'm from Georgia and we face so many gender problems in our Caucasus region. It's an old patriarchal traditional countries in there in Caucasus. So I just recently had small fund in Georgia to make some very nice, let's say, videos about women and about activism and gender and climate change. And then I got to know about lots of problems they face in the regions. So I just wanted to ask you and advise. So when applying to such grants, how to try and attract donors in terms of, let's say, putting some things in the budget to incentivize these women. I mean, it's like you can't pay them, because sometimes, I mean, I wanted to pay our woman we were shooting a video about her, but we didn't have a budget, so all of us who had some kind of payment for ourselves, like a salary, we just gave it to her, but we couldn't transfer because she really doesn't have a bank account. So it's so difficult to do all of this and to think beforehand, and to then send it like in a proposal, especially when all of them have this formats and some forms you have to fill in and strictly
I hear you on this, right? I get it. So difficult. I think it's really important to note that there is a growing conversation globally around donor focused grant making. And is it donor focused, or is it focused on the needs of the people that you want to serve? And right now, the way that a lot of grant making is done is it is completely focused on all the requirements of the grantor. But a lot of times that actually becomes a tremendous burden on the grantee. So that even if you get the grant, the amount of reporting required or the prohibitions around how the money is transferred are very honestly also globally, again, focused around global north systems and trying to get everybody else to mold to systems that it can become so difficult as to become prohibitive. A good thing that's happening is there is a growing push for funding streams and models that will enable ease of access especially for grassroots women and girls and local community-led initiatives, and to make it a lot easier to both access the funds, get fund transfers, and to report, and to really streamline those and to have more co-creative approaches to developing these new funds. So So in the short term, though, I think that it is a little bit harder to find those funds that make that easier, but I'm happy to share with you a couple of examples of funds. Like there's a foundation in France called the Raja, R-A-J-A Foundation. And Raja Foundation is doing very kind of small grants that are highly accessible to grassroots organizations, including those without traditional bank accounts. And so they're really working hard to figure out how to deal with the kinds of issues that you brought up. And also one thing that you can have in your pocket to support your funding requests, though, are the reports from, say, UN Women, like the reports I highlighted in my presentation, like the Feminist Framework, has so many good figures and numbers, the Gender Responsive Just Transitions Policy Brief, so much good information about why we connect women and girls and environment, and why it's really critical to fund at that intersection.
Fantastic. I don't see any more hands up. We are approaching the end of our allotted time. I have taken your 4 lessons that gender equality is not a plus, but a necessity. We need to integrate and mainstream it, that global multi-stakeholder partnerships are worth the work, and we need more research and support for collaborations and coalitions. And a new word for me today is super coalitions.
Super coalitions.
And my message from you that I took from this is be unafraid. I think if we can all go into the world more unafraid, or dealing with our fear and doing it anyway. And on a final note, I would just like to thank Rosalind for a tour de force of reflections. Fantastic talk. As the first one, I'd like to thank Soros for initiating the series, Shelley for supporting it, and Albina too. If you are a member of the UCLAN network, do submit a talk to Shelley. And finally, thank you all for attending this excellent seminar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pamela, for chairing. Thank you for our organizers. Thank you, everyone, for attending today.